All right, good morning again. We're returning to our capstone presentations. Delighted the next one is Janessa Blythe, her project Book Accessibility, Waco Up and Read. And hope everyone here and back home are enjoying all these presentations, and good luck to Janessa.
Hello everybody, my name is Janessa Blythe, just like Ann said, and my capstone project has to do with book accessibility, especially for kids who come from low-income backgrounds. I've titled it Waco Up and Read, as it will take place in Waco, Texas, where I go to school and where Baylor is located. So first and foremost, I think my childhood and the way that I grew up really informed why I care about book accessibility so much and why I love books in general. I definitely grew up in the kind of household that always had books everywhere. In my family, every single night, my parents would read us books, and as we got older, we would race to finish the library summer reading programs. And just everything about my childhood really involved print rather than TV, and I loved all of the books I had. My dad would build new shelves in my room as I needed them, and I really fell in love with all of the characters and all of the stories that I had access to. And when I think back on my childhood and I think about the books that influenced my life, I can point to certain books that taught me a certain lesson or helped me understand something that I was going through. And this book here, Chrysanthemum, is one of those books. When I was a kid, my name, Janessa, was kind of insecurity for me. I thought it was a little bit strange. None of the other little girls had names like mine. And I was afraid of my own individuality, I guess. And my mom, in her infinite wisdom, got me the book Chrysanthemum. In this book, the little mouse, her name is Chrysanthemum, and she's insecure about her name because none of the other little mice have names like her. So through this story, she starts school and she comes to learn to love her name. And it was through this book and reading the story and seeing her learn to love her individuality that I came to love my own name and became a lot more comfortable with my individuality. Now as a college student, I actually study in a department called Great Texts, which basically means that I get to read great stories all the time. And this past year, I spent a lot of my time studying story structure, and that's actually what you see here on the screen. These are all different points that exist in pretty much all great stories. And what's really neat is that you can actually map most stories to these points really easily. You can take anything from a Shakespeare play to Harry Potter to Star Wars, and you'll be able to find all of these points if you know what you're looking for really, really well. But what I really want to point you to is this one called the brick wall. So this point in a story is the point when all is lost for a character. The main character has made choices that have led them to this point that's kind of, they're up against this brick wall because they don't know what to do next. And in order to break through the brick wall, the character typically has to make a change themselves, or do some things a little bit differently. And what you see if you are paying attention to story structure and you're seeing these patterns is that these characters are able to do that they're able to overcome challenges that they face and challenges that they may have created for themselves, and that there's a lot of ability for people to overcome. So I think this idea that stories teach people that they can overcome things is another reason why I'm really passionate about book accessibility, because yes, books bring you knowledge. Yes, books allow you to become better at reading and do better in school, but books also give you access to story. And story teaches you things about humanity and teaches you things about yourself. And I think that for kids, especially who come from low-income backgrounds and from disadvantaged backgrounds, being able to see characters overcome things, I think that offers a lot of hope and teaches you that you can overcome things yourselves. So this past year, I was actually introduced to the problem of lack of book access through a project that I did at Baylor. I ran a small-scale book drive where I took books from some schools that are in higher income areas, and I turned around and gave those to kids at a program called Restoration Haven. This program deals with third-generation poverty cycle kids, and here I am with some of the kids when I delivered the books. Their books are in those bags. And These kids, I found out through my project, lack access to books mainly in their homes. Speaking with the volunteers at this program, they kept telling me time and time again that this is exactly what the kids need. They have books at school and they have some here, but they don't have any books at home. They can't read when they're at home. And while I was working on this project, I was also doing some research that just showed me that the issue extended beyond this small community that I was witnessing. And it just really pushed me to want to do something about it. And that's actually part of the reason that I applied to this program, so that I would have the time and space to do so. So what I saw with this community was that their lack of book access was coming from really three sources. The first of those was that they had either underfunded or faraway libraries. And the second was that the parents either do not or cannot provide books in the home, or are sometimes illiterate themselves. So, I mean, this is an issue in itself that parents don't know that they need to provide books, but a lot of times they're not able to because books are expensive and they're hard to access for people from low-income communities. And the third thing I saw was that the school libraries didn't allow the students to take the books home because the risk of loss and damage was too high. And while that's an understandable thing for a school library to do, it also limits access to books in the home for children. So as I did some more research, I found that the problem actually is a lot deeper. The ratio in low-income neighborhoods for age-appropriate books is 1 for every 300 children. That's a staggering number, especially for someone who, until I stumbled upon this community, didn't know that kids didn't have books in their homes. Additionally, 61% of low-income families have no books at all in their homes. And even when the kids do participate in after-school programs or have books at school, still 80% of the preschool and after-school programs serving low-income populations have no age-appropriate books for their children. So it's actually really hard for low-income families to have books in their home, and the kids just aren't able to read because of that. Because that's the first step to being able to read, having access to books. And just to give you an idea of how many children this actually affects, this is a map showing how many children by region are low income in these areas. So if you think about it, and you think about almost half of the children in the South are from low-income families, you just realize that, like, in those neighborhoods, there's one book for every 300 children. And you just see that it's a bigger problem than you'd ever know. So there's another aspect to this problem of book access, is the fact that it affects kids later on. It's not just a problem when you're a child. It becomes a problem when you're in high school and you're taking standardized tests, when you're trying to get into college. It's compounded over your life. So one of the studies that I was looking at shows that children from high-income and low-income families at the beginning of second grade, they differ by 7 months in reading level. And that's not too bad, but by the time you get to the end of 6th grade, they differ by 2 years and 7 months. So you just see it compound over time. What you have to understand is that even 15 minutes of independent reading a day exposes a child to like 1 million words of text in a year. And so when high-income children go home, their parents are able to provide books for them, and they're able to get that time and more exposure to words and books. But the low-income children go home and there's no books, and they don't even have a chance. And so while the higher-income children keep learning while they're at home, the lower-income children aren't able to do the same. And the study did find that while school was in session, the children learned at the same pace. So it's not a question of kids being smarter or not doing as well in school. It's actually those times away from school and when the kids are on breaks that are really impacting the low-income children. They found that in those 4 summers between 2nd grade and 6th grade, 80% of that achievement difference occurred in those summers. Oh, sorry. So after doing a lot of this research and just kind of seeing the communities myself, I think that a solution is increasing access to books. And the aim, I think, is to get them in the home, because I've seen that they're at schools and they're at a lot of after-school programs, but not all. But if you give them access in their homes, they're able to read when they're away from school. And the research does support this. Having books in the home has a greater impact on children from the least educated families. And it makes sense to target these families because they are the ones who can't afford books, and it does have a greater impact on them. Additionally, having books in the home is twice as important as the father's education level. And what you also need to understand about this is that books in the home and parents' education level have been shown to have independent effects. So while we can't always do things to change the parents' education level, we can provide books, and that'll have an effect on its own. And also, it's kind of intuitive, but reading to young children is related to stronger subsequent academic achievement. So again, starting when they're younger, providing them with books and getting them to read younger will compound and have a better influence later on when they're taking important tests and trying to get good grades so they can get into college. And lastly, the most successful way to improve reading achievement of low-income children is actually to increase their access to print. And so that's why my project is focusing on increasing access to books. So my cause is actually to provide greater access to books for children who come from low-income families on a consistent basis with the aim of books being in the home. I want to highlight that I note on a consistent basis here because another thing you have to understand about reading is that your reading level is always changing, and you need challenging material, interesting material, new stories to improve as a reader. And so it's important to have access to books that's consistent. Right now, a lot of low-income children will receive books from a Christmas book drive, but they're not going to have access to books throughout the whole year. And as we were talking about earlier, like those summers are really important, and so it's important that that book access is sustained over the whole year. So while I've been at Mount Vernon, I've been formulating an action plan as to what I'm actually going to do about this. And the first thing that I'm thinking is that I want to run a one-year pilot program. Eventually, I'd like this to become a bigger project, but this year I'd like to work just on a small scale with a few kids. And what I'd like to do is start each child out with a 5-book starter library. And then each month, give the child another book. So this would total to 16 books over the year. And throughout the program, we'd be trying to teach the kids how to take care of their own books, how to cultivate their library, and be encouraging them to read their books. I would like to work with the children at Restoration Haven, which is actually that first group that I did a book drive with. I've been in conversation with their director, and we're actually speaking tomorrow a little bit more about cultivating a partnership, and they're really interested in doing this with my program. The books are going to actually be sourced through First Book, which is a nonprofit that my mentor actually is from. She's the vice president over there, and she and I have been talking a lot about how First Book can make the resources of books available to me for my project. They're a really unique organization in that they have deals with publishers so that they can provide new paperback children's books at a low cost. And they also have books available for free through their book bank. And I'll be sourcing my books through both of those methods. And funding. So what I'm thinking is that this year, just for my pilot program, I'd like to crowdsource my funding. And First Book also makes that really easy via their website. They have a tool for that where I can set up a page. And I can reach out to my own network to try and crowdsource. But also, First Book has agreed to write a blog post about my project and put a link to my fundraising page. That way I could possibly gain resources from their network too. To complete this project for the first year, I should only need about $1,500, and I think that's a really attainable goal via crowdsourcing. So my vision statement is that every child would have adequate access to books to support learning and development, and that no child would have educational opportunities closed to them because of inadequate access to books at a young age. And my mission for my program, Waco Up and Read, is to provide greater access to good, age-appropriate books to children who come from low-income backgrounds. So some of the outputs that I anticipate my program producing are things like book selection. It's important to have good stories. It's important to have stories that have diversity in them. And it's also important to have stories that match a child's reading level. So I think that's actually going to be one of my challenges that I face too, is making sure that the books match the reading level of the child. Another output I see is raising funds, and I've talked a little bit about how I'm going to do that. And additionally, book distribution is another output. I've been thinking about where I might store the books and who might help me distribute them. And I started a conversation with a group at Baylor in the School of Education who might be interested. Another output is teaching kids how to own books. I think I want to focus on things like having them write their name on the inside front cover and teaching them that this is your book. And you can lend it to a friend, but you guys need to trade back and you can put your name on it, that way you know. So you can cultivate sharing, you can cultivate ownership of things and treating them well. And so that's another aspect of my program. And eventually I'd like to partner with other programs. So some of my short-term and long-term outcomes that I'm looking at. Short-term, I'd like to make more books available in the homes of low-income families. I'd like to promote reading early on in childhood, and I'd like to provide consistent access to books. Long-term outcomes, I'd like to see greater access to educational opportunities for kids who have greater access to books early on. I'd like to see better test scores, better performance in school, and a smaller achievement gap. I recognize that there are a lot of influences that go into these types of long-term outcomes, but book access is one of the things that plays into it, and so I would like to see a change in that. So some of the challenges that I think I might face with my program is, of course, book selection. I touched on that a minute ago, trying to make sure that the books are age appropriate, that they match reading level, and that they're good material. I think that's going to be a challenge. I also think sustainability is a challenge. I'd like to see my program evolve into a nonprofit. That way that I could fund it via grants and that I could expand it to more schools. Buy-in from parents is another challenge I see. I've been thinking about how I can talk to this community and get the parents to understand that their children need to be reading and that increasing their access to books is really important. And I worry about books actually being read. I don't know if I can force any child to read a book, but I think it's a risk that I'm willing to take to provide them book access at this point. I'm thinking more about that, obviously, but if they don't have books, then they can't read. So at this point, I think that the first step I need to take is books. And I also worry about other negative influences on a child's life who comes from a low-income background. A lot of them face things like hunger and have trouble with shelter and things like that. And so I worry that the other influences may hurt the children as well as they seek educational opportunities. For me, I think that defining success in the short term would be launching my pilot program during this 2016-2017 school year. And I'm already in conversation with people, so I think that I will hopefully be able to meet that. But long term, I would really like to see this program become a nonprofit that provides books access to more children in Waco. This year, I'm just going to be working with about 30 kids, but beyond that, I'd like to see it help more children. Waco has a pretty overwhelming poverty rate of 37% of the children, and so it could really impact a lot of the students there. And that's all I have, so I'll take any questions at this time. Doug.
I think it's really great. I love it. I agree it. I mean, I think the research is wonderful. Do you have a lot of possible team members or helpers in your university community or in your local community there that will be part of this movement?
So I've just recently started conversations with Baylor School of Education. There's a Living and Learning Center, which is one of our residence halls on campus, and that's actually where I work as an RA. And I'm hoping, and this Living and Learning Center is hoping to get a more sustainable community service aspect in it. And so we've talked a little bit about possibly making my program one of the projects of the hall.
Amanda again. Are you planning on focusing on grades 2 through 6, since those are the mentioned grades, or are you planning on expanding to other grades as well?
And initially, I'm planning on focusing on around the grade school age, but the program that I'm hoping to work with this year has a couple of 6th and 7th graders, but most of them are grade school. So I think the focus would be grade school because that's when you're learning to read, and I think that's a really important time period. But it's possible I could expand later on.
So I'm really interested, first of all,
I definitely prefer print books, and I think that may be a little bit more of a personal thing. I think it is important to hold books and be able to cultivate a little library, and I think that means a lot to kids, especially kids that come from disadvantaged backgrounds. Owning books, I think that can mean a lot to them, especially when you can promote things like sharing stories with each other and trading. So I think that for now, my project will definitely focus on print books, but I do see a possible future with digital books. It's just that accessing technology is also a problem for kids that come from low-income families, so I think that that could play into that. John.
So I was curious, you mentioned book selection is really important, especially with the reading level, because some people might need to read lower levels than with their age, and some people might read higher levels. But also, I was wondering how you plan on addressing that, but also like interests, because some people might want to read like sci-fi and fantasy, some people might want to read like biographies of George Washington.
Well, that's what we would give Doug. But, so I do think that part of that is going to involve feedback of the programs that I'm working with. So the director of the program that I'm hoping to work with this year, she knows all the kids, and if she can give me some feedback about what the kids are interested in, I can cultivate the books that they would get personally. But also, one of the things that my mentor and I have talked about is when I would deliver the books, like each month, having a little bit of a reading party to create excitement around books and to really like play up the fact that books are exciting, owning books is fun, stories are great, and possibly doing some read alouds at those times. I'm not exactly sure that I'll be able to do that because I'm still working out my partnership with the program that I want to work with, but that's definitely something that I would like to do to get the kids interested in reading. Sean.
Yeah, I did, because you mentioned it several times, and I know it sounds like you don't have it necessarily all worked out, which is fine, but are there any initial thoughts on, as John brought up, on the assessment and knowing where the students are at, so you're not handing someone who's at one level, books. That could have the opposite effect if they find it too challenging and they're giving up reading.
Mm-hmm.
And saying, I don't want to deal with this. I mean, is there any initial thoughts on how you would handle the selection?
So I thought a little bit about that, and the first thing obviously is grade level that you can look at. But beyond that, I think I am going to have to speak more with the directors of the program to see which students they feel like are a little bit more behind and which are more at grade level. But I've also considered looking into the methods like the accelerated reader kind of things that mark books like a 6.7 or 3.4 to see if I can use some of those methods to try and get the kids where they're at.
Yeah, you may also want to just check with the local school system and see what assessment they use, and that the students may be well aware where they're at. So, if it say it's a DRA, well, I'm at 38, and so you can you can look easily online and find all the books that are DRA 38. Not all, but good bunch of titles that you can then compare to other books. So there's a lot of assessment that public schools use that will tell you where they've been assessed, where they're at. That could help you in figuring out, okay, these are some books for these different people that are matching up selection.
That's a really great point. I will definitely look into that. Chidima had a question.
Yeah, I had a question from online viewer and inaugural fellow, Clara Milokovic. She asked, what is one book that you believe all elementary school children should read and why?
Oh, that's a tough one. So I think that all students should read the Nancy Drew novels. Because I think that mysteries are really great schools for elementary students to be able to read because it gets your creativity flowing and it makes you think a lot. So it's kind of a puzzle while it's also kind of a cliffhanger, so it keeps you involved in the story. And there's so many Nancy Drews that if you love one, you're probably going to love them all. And we had a question over here.
I was just going to piggyback on Sean. Another source might be libraries. I realize there's not a lot of libraries in the low-income neighborhoods, but perhaps there's a program at one of the universities or something like that that could assist you with assessing your needs and feel that they would then go to a school and have the library sit down and talk to you about the books.
That's also a really great point. Thank you. And back here, Allison.
Just a comment and a question. I just love the concept that you have about teaching kids how to own books. I think that you hit on something really interesting there.
So for now, I do want to focus on Waco, and there are a lot of after-school programs in Waco that I'd like to work with. As Waco is a city that does have a lot of poverty, there's a lot of programs there, and a lot of them already have good relationships with Baylor, especially. And so I'd like to tap into those relationships. And that's definitely something I'm looking for after my pilot program runs, and if I can gain funding to expand. But I think after-school programs is where I'd like to focus. Are there any other questions? Garrett.
First of all, I really like your cause and the story, your personal story that you tied to it. But I was wondering, as far as longevity goes, I know that you're interested in going to law school. Is this something that you are still going to be interested in or trying to work on while you're attending law school?
So I would love if I could continue working on this, and this is definitely something that a challenge that I'm facing in my own mind. I'm not exactly sure what this project is going to evolve into for my life. I'm obviously really passionate about books and book access, and I would love to stay involved with it, but I also recognize that I do need to finish up school, and so that's part of why I'm thinking about partnering with Baylor School of Education. So currently, I don't have a for sure answer, but I could see myself staying involved, but I could also see myself trying to set it up so I can pass it off. We're just going to have to see what happens, but I really care a lot about this project, so who knows what's going to happen with my life. Well, if there aren't any further questions, thank you.